Evelyn Harper had always lived a quiet life, the kind of life that moves in small, predictable rhythms, where the days bleed into one another like gentle waves on a calm shore. And yet, on that rainy evening, something felt off. A tension she couldn't name as she stood in the kitchen with a warm cup of tea that had long since cooled, watching the droplets race down the windowpane, and for a moment she allowed herself to breathe, thinking only of the mundane. Did she need to fix the leaky sink? Or check the mailbox? But the sound of soft footsteps behind the garage door made her pause, a small prickle of unease traveling down her spine, because while she had seen her daughter Lily's boyfriend Daniel Moore before, she had never caught him alone in this house, and the garage had always been a place of work, clutter, and shadows, never a space for intimate conversations. Yet here he was, standing awkwardly among scattered tools and boxes, his hands stuffed into his pockets, a hesitant look in his eyes that spoke of thoughts he could not easily share, and Evelyn felt that subtle, unexplainable pull, the one that makes a person notice not just presence but something more, some hidden weight that others carry silently, because in that moment, Daniel seemed smaller than his years, unsure, hesitant, yet quietly dignified, and when she asked him if he was searching for something, she expected a simple answer, maybe a request for a wrench or a screwdriver, but instead, Daniel's gaze flickered to the floor, and he spoke in a voice soft enough that Evelyn had to lean closer to hear, confessing feelings that went far beyond tools or chores, talking about his struggles, about being inadequate, about his love for Lily, about his fear that he could never be the man she deserved. And Evelyn listened, her heart tightening in ways she hadn't felt in years, remembering her own youth, her own longings, her own fears, and she realized that the honesty in his voice, the rawness of his worries, resonated deeply within her, stirring memories of the quiet sacrifices she had made, the nights she had spent awake wondering if love was always this hard, if people were always this fragile. And while the words were meant for a daughter she adored, they somehow touched a part of Evelyn she had long ignored, a part that remembered tenderness, vulnerability, and the ache of being truly seen. And as the rain pattered on the roof and shadows played along the walls stacked with dusty boxes and unfinished projects, Evelyn felt the garage transform from a storage space into a confessional, a place where two people could speak truths that had been buried for too long, where emotions that had been quietly simmering could rise to the surface without shame. And she noticed how Daniel's eyes reflected uncertainty but also a kind of courage, the courage it takes to speak honestly even when the consequences are unknown, and she found herself leaning against the workbench, holding onto the edge to steady herself, because the feelings his words evoked were unexpected, powerful, and entirely human, a mixture of empathy, recognition, and something gentler, something that made her pulse quicken and her chest feel both tight and strangely light at the same time. And as the conversation continued, Daniel admitted that he sometimes felt trapped, that he struggled to balance the love he had for Lily with the weight of expectations he placed on himself, and Evelyn, who had raised her daughter to be independent and kind, realized that this young man's struggles mirrored many of her own from years past, and she understood that while she needed to stay mindful of boundaries, she could not ignore the connection that was forming. Delicate and unspoken, a bridge of human understanding built from words spoken in honesty, and she found herself responding not with judgment but with gentle encouragement, offering advice she had learned the hard way, reminding him that mistakes were part of growing, that loving someone meant accepting their imperfections as well as your own. And Daniel nodded, relief softening the tension in his shoulders, because just being heard, just being taken seriously, was enough to lift some of the burdens he carried. And as Evelyn watched him take a deep breath, she felt a mix of protectiveness and fascination, emotions that were unfamiliar in their intensity, yet comforting in their sincerity, and she knew that this evening, this simple, rainy, ordinary evening, had shifted something in both of them, a subtle, irreversible change that neither could fully name, because human hearts are complicated, and sometimes the smallest acts of listening and honesty can leave lasting impressions. And when Daniel finally smiled, a small, tentative curve of lips that spoke more than words could, Evelyn felt a warmth spread through her chest, a quiet acknowledgement that life, even in its routine, could still surprise, and that moments like these, though fleeting, carried the weight of significance that one might only realize in hindsight. And as the rain slowed outside and the garage returned to its usual quiet, Evelyn and Daniel both knew that what had been said between them would linger in the spaces of memory, unspoken yet present, shaping thoughts, stirring emotions, and creating an invisible thread of understanding that neither expected, a thread that connected two hearts in ways that were subtle, respectful, and profoundly human. And as Evelyn finally stepped back from the workbench, brushing imaginary dust from her sleeves, she could feel that her own world had quietly shifted, that the ordinary evening had become extraordinary simply because two people had dared to speak honestly, and that the garage, a place of shadows and tools, had transformed into a place where hearts met in the simplest yet most meaningful way, leaving both Evelyn and Daniel aware that life often carries unexpected moments that change everything, not by grand gestures, but through small, honest conversations that remind us of our shared vulnerability, our need for connection, and the enduring power of being seen and understood by another human being. And as the door closed behind her and she walked back toward the warmth of the house, Evelyn could not stop the flutter in her chest, nor the quiet hope that sometimes, even in the most routine lives, a single conversation can open doors to emotions long forgotten, revealing that life's surprises often arrive softly, in the hum of rain, the quiet of a garage, and the unguarded words of someone brave enough to speak their truth. After that rainy evening in the garage, Evelyn Harper tried to convince herself that nothing had changed, that it was just a passing moment between a mother and her daughter's boyfriend. Yet the truth of that conversation lingered in ways she could not ignore, following her through the quiet rooms of her home, through the soft hum of the refrigerator, and the gentle ticking of the clock, as if the house itself whispered reminders of what had been said. And even in the small routines of her life, preparing breakfast, folding laundry, watering the plants, Daniel's words echoed, gentle but insistent, stirring memories and feelings she had long buried beneath years of caution and responsibility, because his honesty had pierced through the armor she had built, revealing cracks she thought had closed forever. And she found herself thinking of him not just as Lily's boyfriend but as a young man struggling to find his place in the world, someone whose vulnerabilities mirrored her own past fears and insecurities. And every time she passed the garage or caught a glimpse of him in the yard, a flutter of unease and curiosity rose inside her, a mixture of concern, empathy, and something tender that she did not dare name. And the following weekend brought that mixture to a quiet, undeniable crescendo, because Daniel returned to the house while Lily was out running errands, and the air between them felt charged in a way that neither could ignore. The spaces they occupied suddenly smaller, the silence heavier, and the ordinary sounds of the home, the creak of the floorboards, the distant hum of traffic, the whisper of wind through the trees, seemed to frame the delicate tension that had settled over them. And when he spoke, it was in the same soft, careful voice he had used in the garage, telling Evelyn that he appreciated her listening, that sharing his thoughts had felt easier than talking to anyone else. And those simple words hit her with a force she did not expect, because they carried a weight of trust and vulnerability that made her heart beat faster. And for a moment, Evelyn could feel the years of solitude and quiet longing rise up inside her, memories of nights spent alone with only her own thoughts for company, the ache of missed connections, and the gentle hope for understanding. And she realized with a mixture of fear and fascination that Daniel's words had touched something deep within her, a place that had been dormant for too long, a place that craved recognition, empathy, and the warmth of someone seeing her as a whole person rather than just a mother. And yet, as these emotions swirled within her, Evelyn reminded herself of boundaries, of the delicate line that separated care from something more. And she tried to focus on the wisdom she could offer, speaking gently about life's challenges, the importance of patience, and the necessity of being honest with oneself. And Daniel listened, nodding, absorbing her words with a seriousness that made her feel both protective and profoundly connected, because the connection forming between them was not built on romance alone, but on the rare, intimate understanding of being truly heard. And as the conversation continued, Evelyn noticed the subtle gestures he made, the slight slump of his shoulders as he admitted his fears, the way his hands twitched when he wanted to express more than words could hold, the way his eyes held a vulnerability that invited trust. And she could not help but respond with the same quiet openness, sharing small stories from her own life, memories of challenges and heartbreaks, moments of regret and moments of quiet triumph. And each revelation created a bridge between them, fragile yet real, A line of human empathy and connection that neither had expected but both felt deeply, and in that shared space, Evelyn became aware of a strange, gentle attraction, not the kind that demands immediacy or crosses boundaries, but the kind that exists quietly in the heart, in the recognition of shared humanity, in the acknowledgement of another person's inner world, and she found herself thinking of Daniel in ways that felt new and tender, a mixture of admiration, longing for connection, and curiosity about the life he was building. And Daniel, for his part, seemed to respond not just with gratitude but with a subtle respect, a recognition that Evelyn was someone who could listen without judgment, who could understand without intrusion, and that realization made him more reflective, more thoughtful in his words, and more aware of the rare comfort he found in her presence. And as the day wore on, the house around them seemed to fade slightly into the background, the sound of the wind outside and the occasional call of a neighbor becoming a soft hum, because the emotional focus between them had become the center of reality, a quiet, shared gravity that pulled their thoughts inward and toward each other without any conscious intention. And in that private bubble of understanding, Evelyn realized that she was no longer just seeing Daniel as her daughter's boyfriend, but as a young man with dreams, fears, and feelings that deserved attention, compassion, and respect. And she felt a profound satisfaction in being the person to witness that honesty, the person who could offer a moment of reprieve from the pressures he faced. And Daniel, sensing her attentiveness and care, found a new confidence rising, not in a boastful way but in the reassurance that being vulnerable could be met with kindness rather than criticism, and that simple human truth became the heart of their interaction, a quiet drama of emotion that neither could fully articulate but both understood. And as evening fell and the sun dipped behind the clouds, casting a gentle golden light through the windows, Evelyn noticed a shift in herself, a soft awakening to the depth of her own capacity to feel again, to care, to connect. And though she fought to keep her thoughts disciplined and focused on her responsibilities, she could not deny the emotional resonance of their conversation, the sense that life had offered her an unexpected gift in the form of honest, unguarded words from someone she had known only casually, yet now felt intimately connected to on an emotional level. And that awareness brought a mixture of joy, tension, and anticipation, because she knew the boundaries of reality, knew the importance of protecting her daughter's trust. Yet she could not ignore the warmth and clarity that Daniel's presence had sparked, nor the quiet reflection that perhaps life could surprise her even now, even after years of careful, measured living, with moments that awakened parts of her she had thought dormant, parts that craved recognition, empathy, and the rare thrill of shared understanding. And as Daniel eventually rose to leave, their farewell was brief but loaded with unspoken meaning, a gentle acknowledgement that their connection had deepened, that emotions had been stirred, and that while the world outside the house remained ordinary and unchanged, within that quiet home, in the stillness of shared hearts, something subtle yet profound had shifted, leaving Evelyn to walk back into the warmth of the kitchen, carrying a mixture of exhilaration and restraint, aware that her life had quietly tilted on a new axis, that her feelings were more alive than she had realized, and that Daniel's return visit, his honesty, and the gentle closeness they had shared had forever altered the landscape of her emotions, opening a space for reflection, longing, and the delicate possibility of connection that she had not expected but could not ignore, because sometimes life's most significant moments arrive not in grand gestures but in small, tender exchanges, in the soft confession of fears, in the quiet sharing of hearts, and in the awareness that even within the safest boundaries, humans can touch each other deeply, change each other subtly, and awaken emotions long thought dormant, leaving both Evelyn and Daniel aware that the story between them was only beginning. A slow, gentle unfolding of understanding, care, and quiet emotional intimacy, all built on the fragile yet unbreakable foundation of honesty, empathy, and shared vulnerability. The days after that quiet weekend grew more complicated for Evelyn Harper than she had anticipated, because life has a way of testing emotions at the exact moment you feel them most strongly. And with Lily speaking of a potential job opportunity in another city, a move that could take her far away for months, maybe years, the stakes felt higher than ever, and Daniel Moore, her daughter's boyfriend, grew restless, pacing the small rooms of the house and lingering in corners as if searching for answers he couldn't find. And Evelyn noticed it immediately, the tension in his jaw, the way his hands clenched and unclenched, the small sighs he released when he thought no one was looking. because Daniel had always seemed confident around Lily, calm in the face of plans and changes, but now he seemed uncertain, fragile. And it drew Evelyn in, her heart tightening with both concern and something quieter, something tender she barely recognized in herself. And one afternoon, with Lily out running errands, Daniel found himself alone in the living room with Evelyn, the house silent except for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional chirp of birds outside, and without preamble, he spoke, confessing that he didn't know if following Lily would feel right, that he was unsure if his love was enough to sustain the distance, or if he was holding on to habits and routines rather than genuine devotion. And Evelyn, feeling the weight of his honesty, allowed herself to speak from the heart, telling him about her own past, about staying in a marriage longer than she should have, about the fear of starting over, the loneliness that crept into quiet nights, the small regrets that gather in a life too carefully planned. And as she spoke, Daniel listened intently, his eyes reflecting surprise and admiration, because no one had ever shared so openly with him before, and he felt an unexpected connection, a sense of understanding and acceptance that had been missing in his life. And Evelyn realized, as she watched him, that the boundaries between them had shifted, not in action, not in words of desire, but in emotional intimacy, the kind that makes hearts race and pulses quicken, the kind that is built on trust, vulnerability, and shared experience. And while she knew the limits, she also knew the power of these moments, the way they illuminate human connection in a quiet, profound way. And Daniel, emboldened by her willingness to share, admitted that he had been afraid to voice his fears to Lily because he didn't want to seem weak, didn't want to jeopardize her confidence in him. And Evelyn, with gentle reassurance, told him that courage isn't the absence of fear but the ability to face it honestly, to acknowledge emotions, and to act with integrity. And as he absorbed these words, she felt a stirring inside herself, a recognition that the guidance she offered came not just from duty but from care, from the natural empathy of someone who sees another human struggling and wants to ease that burden. And the atmosphere in the room shifted subtly, the air warmer, heavier, intimate in a safe, mature way. And Daniel's glances lingered just a fraction longer than necessary, his eyes reflecting gratitude, a quiet admiration, and something softer, a recognition of the rare comfort of being fully understood. And Evelyn, aware of the electricity in the space between them, reminded herself to breathe, to remain grounded, to honor the boundaries that protected both her and her daughter. Yet she could not deny the emotional resonance, the sense that this conversation was shaping both of them, expanding the boundaries of empathy, creating an invisible bridge of human connection, the kind that doesn't need physical touch to be felt deeply. And as they continued, Daniel spoke of his hopes and insecurities, of the pressure to succeed, the fear of disappointing those he loved, the quiet longing for validation and guidance. And Evelyn responded with stories from her own life, small memories of mistakes, lessons learned, moments of heartbreak, and moments of unexpected joy. And each admission drew them closer, not in romance, but in understanding, in the shared acknowledgement of what it means to feel deeply, to care profoundly, to be human. And she realized that sometimes emotional closeness can be just as powerful as physical proximity. That two hearts can meet in the space of honesty, and that the subtle intensity of such moments leaves traces that linger far longer than fleeting gestures. And Daniel, feeling the weight of her experience and wisdom, began to reflect more clearly on his own life, his love for Lily, and the choices that lay ahead. And he admitted, almost in a whisper, that he was grateful for Evelyn's presence, her guidance, and the gentle clarity she offered, because she had given him a mirror through which to see himself more fully. And Evelyn, listening to his words, felt a mixture of pride, tenderness, and a strange, quiet longing, a longing not for action, not for romance, but for connection, for the comfort of being needed, for the recognition of shared humanity. And as the day turned to evening, the golden light filtering softly through the windows, the quiet intimacy of the room wrapped around them like a gentle cloak, shielding them from the outside world. And for a few hours, they existed in that safe, unspoken space, exploring emotions carefully, navigating the delicate terrain of honesty, and both aware that what they shared was fragile, profound, and transformative, shaping how they saw themselves in each other. And as Daniel eventually rose to leave, he paused, a small, hesitant smile playing on his lips, the kind of smile that conveys gratitude, awareness, and a quiet respect, and Evelyn, sensing the weight of the moment, returned a soft nod, her heart a mixture of warmth, apprehension, and something tender, because she understood that their connection had deepened, that this emotional intimacy was not a threat to boundaries but a testament to the power of honest conversation, to the beauty of human empathy. And as the door closed behind him and the house returned to its usual quiet, Evelyn felt the lingering presence of Daniel's words, his honesty, and the unspoken bond that had formed, a bond that reminded her that even in ordinary lives, extraordinary moments of connection can occur, subtle and transformative, and that human hearts can meet, understand, and influence each other profoundly without crossing lines, without violating trust, simply by sharing truth, by listening with care, and by allowing oneself to be present in another person's life. And in that quiet evening, as Evelyn sat alone, she reflected on the delicate complexity of feelings, the beauty of emotional intimacy, and the way one conversation can reshape perspectives, awaken forgotten emotions, and open doors to understanding, empathy, and self-discovery, leaving both her and Daniel changed, quietly, gently, irrevocably, and ready to face the challenges ahead with a deeper awareness of themselves, their relationships, and the subtle, profound impact of honest, heartfelt connection that exists in the space between two people who dare to be real, vulnerable, and human. The night before Lily's departure arrived quietly, wrapped in the gentle hum of the evening and the soft glow of lamps casting shadows across the living room, and Evelyn Harper felt a mixture of anticipation, apprehension, and a strange, tender melancholy as she moved through the familiar spaces of her home, noticing how each room seemed to hold memories now tinged with a subtle tension, because Daniel Moore, her daughter's boyfriend, had come over one last time before Lily left, and the house seemed charged with the weight of unspoken thoughts, with emotions too delicate to name yet impossible to ignore, and as he stepped inside, he hesitated at the threshold, a polite smile on his lips, but eyes that betrayed uncertainty, concern, and a vulnerability that had deepened since the first rainy evening in the garage, and Evelyn, noticing this, felt her chest tighten in that familiar way, a gentle ache of empathy mixed with the quiet recognition that human hearts have a capacity to connect in unexpected ways, and she invited him to sit, gesturing toward the worn sofa, while the rain from earlier had ceased, leaving the night cool and still, and as they sat, the usual clatter of life seemed to fade, leaving only the soft rhythm of their breathing and the subtle tension of anticipation, because both knew that this conversation could mark an ending, a beginning, or perhaps both, depending on the courage they summoned to speak honestly. And Daniel, after a long pause, spoke first, admitting that their conversations over the past weeks had changed him, not in ways he could easily describe, not in ways that threatened propriety or boundaries, but in ways that forced him to confront his own fears, his hopes, and the kind of person he truly wanted to be. And Evelyn, listening with quiet attention, felt the familiar stirrings of emotion, the mixture of care, tenderness, and the bittersweet pull of longing that had followed her since that first encounter in the garage, and she realized that the intimacy between them had been emotional, subtle, respectful, and profound, a bond built not on crossing lines but on honesty, empathy, and shared understanding. And as Daniel spoke of his gratitude for her guidance, the way her presence had allowed him to reflect, to see himself more clearly, to consider his love for Lily and his own path forward, Evelyn understood that this moment was pivotal, a moment of clarity, of choice, of recognizing the impact of connection, and though her heart fluttered with emotions she could not fully name, she reminded herself of her responsibilities, her role as a mother, and the importance of encouraging Daniel to follow the path that was right for him, even if it meant stepping away from the bond that had grown between them. And when Daniel expressed his fears about leaving Lily, about the uncertainty of moving to another city, about the anxiety of balancing love, personal growth, and ambition, Evelyn spoke with the calm wisdom earned through years of experience, telling him that true courage is in making choices aligned with honesty, that love requires patience and understanding, and that the most meaningful connections often shape us quietly, teaching lessons without demanding surrender to temptation or impropriety. And as they shared these truths, the air between them seemed to vibrate with emotion, a delicate, almost tangible acknowledgement that they had touched something human and essential in each other, a quiet awakening to the strength of empathy, compassion, and emotional clarity. And Daniel, hearing her words, felt a renewed sense of direction, realizing that while he loved Lily and wanted to support her dreams, he also needed to act with integrity, to communicate honestly, and to embrace the responsibility that came with the love he felt. And Evelyn, observing his reflection and self-awareness, felt pride, warmth, and a bittersweet sadness, because the bond they had formed was profound yet had to remain within the boundaries of respect. And as the evening deepened, they spoke gently of hopes, dreams, and the future, each word measured, careful, yet full of authenticity. And Evelyn noticed how Daniel's posture relaxed, how the tension in his shoulders eased, how the subtle lines of worry on his face softened, and she felt an echo of relief in herself, a quiet joy in knowing that her guidance had helped him. And in that moment, she understood the delicate beauty of emotional intimacy, of connection built on trust, honesty, and shared humanity, without needing to cross forbidden lines. And as the clock ticked toward night's end, Daniel rose to leave, pausing at the door to offer a final, sincere expression of gratitude, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that conveyed respect, admiration, and a subtle, unspoken acknowledgement of the bond they had formed. And Evelyn, responding with a gentle nod and a soft smile, felt her heart flutter with a mixture of pride, relief, and the quiet ache of parting, because the connection they shared had been meaningful, transformative even, yet had to remain within the limits that honored her daughter, their roles, and the integrity of their lives. And as she closed the door behind him, the house felt unusually still, almost reverent, as if it had absorbed the weight of their conversation. And Evelyn reflected on the journey of these past weeks, the initial rainy evening in the garage, the quiet but profound conversations, the moments of laughter, tension, reflection, and understanding, all leading to this delicate conclusion. And she realized that life's most important lessons are often delivered in quiet moments, through conversations that awaken self-awareness, emotional depth, and empathy, teaching us that connection is powerful, that honesty is transformative, and that love in its many forms can be respected, cherished, and expressed without crossing boundaries. And as she moved to tidy the living room, her mind lingered on the subtle impact Daniel had had on her life, on the reminder that hearts can be touched in unexpected ways, that emotions once thought dormant can be awakened gently, that personal growth often comes from listening and understanding, and that endings can be beautiful even when they are tinged with longing, because they carry the promise of clarity, self-reflection, and the courage to face the future with integrity. And as she finally climbed the stairs to her room, the soft glow of the lamp casting shadows along the walls, Evelyn felt a serene sense of completion, a quiet acknowledgement that the conversation in the garage, the weeks of gentle connection, and the heartfelt discussion on this final night had indeed changed everything, not by breaking trust or rules, but by teaching both her and Daniel that emotional honesty, empathy, and the courage to confront one's feelings can transform hearts, deepen understanding, and leave an enduring mark that shapes how we love, care, and move forward in life. And as she lay down to sleep, Evelyn knew that this subtle, profound shift would stay with her forever, a quiet testament to the power of human connection, respect, and the gentle beauty of moments that arrive unexpectedly, teaching that even in restraint, there is intimacy, even in endings, there is growth, and even in ordinary lives, extraordinary lessons of the heart can unfold when two people dare to speak honestly, listen deeply, and honor the fragile yet powerful threads that tie human souls together in the shared experience of love, care, and understanding.